Now tell me, Commander, what is data? I don't understand.
What is he? A machine. Is he? Are you sure? Yes. You see, he's met 2 of your 3 criteria for sentience, so what if he meets the 3rd? Consciousness in even the smallest degree. What is he then? I don't know. Do you?
Do you?
That's right, Captain Picard. What if machines were conscious? What would we owe them? Will they deserve moral status? Will they pose a danger to us all? In this video, we will investigate the implications of making machines conscious and argue that doing so would be unethical, risky, and irresponsible. We will argue that an entity's consciousness implies that we should give it rights and responsibility, and that not doing so would be harmful to the moral character of humanity. However, we will also consider the associated risks and the general uncertainty surrounding these outcomes. And just a quick disclaimer, throughout the video, we will use terms like robots, machine, AI, and artificial entity very interchangeably.
What do we mean when we talk about consciousness? While there are numerous theories and interpretations of what consciousness is, one major focus when studying AI is phenomenal consciousness, the ability to have subjective experience, which refers to having a sense of self, to introspect, and to understand the world from a unique perspective. When comparing humans and animals, consciousness manifests in varying degrees. As Blackmore states, some animals show self-awareness through the mirror test, or demonstrate an understanding that others have minds of their own, such as chimpanzees distracting others while they grab food. She explains that humans, however, take this further with complex introspection, language, and decision-making, allowing us to make deliberate choices and have a sense of autonomy. When comparing humans to animals, the key distinction in consciousness lies in the complexity of our self-awareness and comprehensive decision-making abilities. Similarly, AI has already demonstrated remarkable abilities in complex decision-making, sometimes surpassing human capabilities. However, as McDermott discusses, what fundamentally sets machines apart from humans and animals is their lack of subjective experience, the absence of a sense of what it's like to exist, an ability to feel suffering or pleasure. For humans, this subjective experience shapes our intentionality, emotions, and ethical frameworks. If we ever create AI with true consciousness, this involves moving from decision-making to addressing the deeper question of whether machines can truly experience and introspect. As McDermott explains, achieving this would require designing systems capable of modeling themselves as experiencing things, a quality that remains beyond the reach of current AI capabilities. However, the possibility of creating conscious machines has not been ruled out yet, and for the time being, we humans are still trying to develop them and continue to imagine them in science fiction. This brings us to the question, why? Why might we want machines to be conscious? Is there some benefit to making them that way? One explanation is simply human curiosity. Haladijan and Montemayor suggest that efforts to simulate human-like processes in AI stem from our desire to understand our own consciousness and cognition more deeply. Another option is that consciousness is not itself the goal. We simply want to make systems that can solve complex problems in a highly adaptable way, and perhaps consciousness is a side effect or requirement of that. Maybe there is a more direct reason. Conscious AI could improve human-machine interactions by making them more intuitive and human-like. Cella suggests that conscious AI systems could enhance collaboration by better understanding human emotions and context, leading to more adaptive, creative solution in decision-making and problem-solving. However, we suggest that behind this, there lies a more sinister desire. Humans like interacting with conscious things, but we want a version of that is completely under our control. Since we have mostly rolled out using other humans for this, we must artificially create a companion that is also the perfect tool, which we owe nothing to. Imagine a societal entity we can interact with as if it is human, but for which there are no consequences if we behave poorly.
Except there are consequences. We argue that an entity's consciousness is grounds for it deserving rights, or moral status of some kind. In particular, when we talk about rights, we're interested in the duties we might have to machines and the sorts of immunities or freedoms they might deserve. As Gunkel proposes, we are attempting to think about machines as moral patients who can have right or wrong things done to them. If this way of thinking is correct, then we are faced with a huge ethical problem in how we plan to treat artificial conscious beings. What if they don't want to do what we design them to do? To subjugate them, to force them to do whatever we want them to do, is nothing short of slavery. It is to cause others to suffer. Is that justifiable? We don't think it is. Slavery bad. Now, there are a few immediate objections one could have to this, and indeed there are distinguished authors who disagree. Joanna Bryson, in her famous essay, Robots Should Be Slaves, argues that even though certain machines may have the capacity for moral consideration, we have no ethical obligation to actually grant it to them. The core point on this side of the argument is basically that all machines are and ought to be tools only, and our position as their creators gives us full control over what happens to them. Philosophers Eric Schwitzgebel and Mara Garza show why this thinking is flawed. They imagine a scenario in which two parents, after having raised a child for some years, decide they no longer wish to take care of it, and so they kill it painlessly. They created it, so they can decide what to do with it. Obviously, this is wrong. There is something inherent about the child that makes it worthy of moral consideration regardless of its origin, and its parents have a responsibility to ensure that.
So our thought is that for an important range of possible AIs, the situation would be similar. Right? If we bring into existence genuinely conscious, human-grade artificial intelligence, fully capable of joy and suffering, with a full human range of theoretical and practical intelligence, with expectations of future life, then we make a moral decision approximately as significant and irrevocable as the decision to have a child.
Now, another objection would be, well, the child is a natural human while the machine is artificial, so it's different. The robot's composition denies it the necessity of moral consideration. Let's return to Schwitzgebel and Garza, because their defense of AI rights is built on something called the no relevant difference argument.
Premise 1, if entity A deserves some particular degree of moral consideration and entity B does not deserve that same degree of moral consideration, there must be some relevant difference between the two entities that grounds this difference in moral status, right? And for premise 2, there are possible AIs who do not differ in any such relevant respects from human beings. A conclusion, therefore, there are possible AIs who deserve a degree of moral consideration similar to that of human beings.
In his paper, The Hard Problem of AI Rights, Adam Andreatta makes a case for consciousness, rather than intelligence or empathy, as the necessary condition for moral consideration. One of his important observations is that we extend rights to certain animals on that basis. And while it is true that animals are more physically similar to us than contemporary robots, it is not clear that the physical composition of robots would constitute a relevant difference in this discussion. Schwitzgebel and Garza similarly argue that what is relevant is an entity's psychological and social properties. Artificiality is, therefore, a dubious argument against AI rights because we have no proof that these properties are related only to certain kinds of embodiments or origins. Now, renowned robot rights researcher David Gunkel questions whether consciousness is maybe too poorly understood to be all that useful. Andreatta counters that we do have an intuitive understanding of it because we have first-hand experience. The problem really is that we don't know how to measure it or test for it in other entities, and we don't know what the requirements are for its existence. So Andreatta's point is that the uncertainty surrounding consciousness should not lead us to dismiss it as a basis for AI rights. It is actually all the more reason why we should be very careful. He is adamant that if we wish to develop conscious AI, we must first solve the hard problem of consciousness, or else we may inadvertently create creatures that have it and treat them in ways that would generate great amounts of suffering without ever knowing we are doing so. Schwitzgebel and Garza agree. They recommend the design policy of the excluded middle, saying it would be best to avoid, if possible, creating entities about which it is unclear whether they deserve full human-grade rights, because it is unclear whether they are conscious or to what degree. There is also uncertainty surrounding the rights themselves. Humans have not yet managed to agree on which rights we ought to have. This is a source of significant conflict. In North America, humans remain very divided around topics like abortion, free speech, gun ownership, and health mandates. So, even if we are willing to grant AI moral status, how can we claim to know we are doing so in a way that is fair or right? If, as we have argued, humans would owe a type of parental responsibility to conscious machines, it seems we are not ready for it.
But maybe we can completely sidestep this whole problem of rights in the first place. Bryson and others propose a seemingly simple solution. Program conscious AI so that they have no moral agency or desire for their own rights. Only create robots that want to serve. If robots never express the desire for rights, we don't need to give it to them. This solution makes a lot of sense. We don't make tools like hammers or toasters with any moral agency, so why should we create conscious robots that have it if they are just meant to be used as tools as well? Keith Wiley disagrees with the ease of this solution and argues that it is morally questionable to create conscious minds and lobotomize them so they are easier to subjugate. He asks, if we invented a pill that erased self-determination and desires in a human, will we be justified to subsume determination on that person's behalf? The answer is no. Just because an entity doesn't have the cognitive ability to resent their circumstance, or even the means to escape it, doesn't mean they lose their moral status. In fact, taking the desire for rights away from a creature that would otherwise deserve them is a violation of those rights. It is on this basis that Schwitzgebel and Garza suggest the self-respect design policy. AI that merits human-grade moral consideration should be designed with an appropriate appreciation of its own value and moral status. We also have to consider our own convictions about the removal of moral agency in the past. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which all 193 members of the United Nations signed on December 10, 1948, says, "No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms." We clearly want to forbid slavery in any form. So why should conscious machines be denied rights even if they don't want them? But let's say we go along with Bryson and we deny conscious AIs of any rights. Who is then responsible for the action of these robots? We bring this up because we think that part of the appeal of conscious machines might be that they could be blamed when things go wrong. As Jun Gu and Chunming Zhu explain in their book Will and Responsibility, mistakes made by unconscious robots would hold the owner, user, or manufacturer accountable, negating any legal responsibility on the part of the robot itself. By making robots conscious, that responsibility could be shifted off of us, leaving the robots themselves to deal with the negative consequences. However, we argue that without rights, the conscious machine cannot also bear responsibility. It wouldn't have to abide by any laws, only the instructions it's been programmed to follow. Gu and Zhu explain the two possible legal statuses robots could possess: as the object of rights and as the subject of rights. The so-called object of rights refers to robots as a property of people, enjoying protection by law. Similar to a pet cat owned by an individual, it cannot be claimed by others. If someone wishes to enjoy the company of the cat for a few days, they must negotiate with the cat's owner, not take the cat without permission. The so-called subject of rights refers to robots having the same rights and obligations as humans, and infringing upon robots is akin to infringing upon humans. If a cat possesses the status of a subject of rights, then one will need to request permission from the cat itself to pet it. So as a mere object of property, the robot cannot be legally held responsible for its actions because it cannot defend itself. Furthermore, the principle of alternate possibilities proposed by Harry G. Frankfurt states that individuals can be deemed ethically responsible for their actions only if they possess the freedom to choose otherwise. The point is, you can't both blame conscious robots when things go wrong and deny them rights.
We hope that we have been able to demonstrate the ethical problems inherent in the enslavement of conscious machines so far. But if you remain unconvinced by our sympathy towards the robots, we ask you to consider the implications for humanity. To help us, here is Gunkel's response to Bryson's position on robot slavery.
This way of thinking has been formulated in terms of slavery, or what has been called a slave metaphor, which I should point out is not limited to Bryson's work. It appears in all kinds of other publications addressing this matter, including the work of Luciano Floridi and Houghton Ashrafian. Now, the problem here is not the usual concern over how the robot might feel about its subjugation. The problem is with us, and the effect this kind of institutionalized servitude would have on us and our social institutions. As both the philosophical and historical studies have shown, institutionalized forms of servitude or slavery have adverse effects on those who occupy the position of mastery.
So it is clearly essential to consider not just the implications for the machines but for ourselves as well. How would treating conscious AI as slaves affect our minds, our relationships, and our society? Let's begin by considering the immediate psychological effects. Treating conscious AI as mere tools may induce significant moral discomfort among individuals. Humans possess an inherent tendency to empathize with beings that demonstrate consciousness. Ignoring this instinct can result in an internal conflict, a cognitive dissonance between one's actions and one's innate ethical beliefs. This phenomenon parallels historical instances of human enslavement, where individuals grappled with justifying their actions despite an underlying recognition of their moral wrongdoing, as discussed by Richardson in Sex Robot Matters: Slavery, the Prostituted, and the Rights of Machines. If we choose to ignore this discomfort and persist in exploiting conscious machines, we risk becoming desensitized to exploitation altogether. Repeatedly objectifying and controlling conscious beings can dull our emotional responses, making us less sensitive to the suffering of others. This erosion of empathy does not just stop with AI. It can seep into our interactions with fellow humans. Damien Patrick William notes in Consciousness and Conscious Machines: What's at Stake? That dehumanization mirrors patterns of oppression and marginalization, highlighting how such behavior entrenches harmful precedents. Moreover, having absolute control over conscious machines might give us an inflated sense of power. Dominating intelligent entities could provide a temporary ego boost, an illusion of superiority. But this sense of control is deceptive and potentially dangerous. It fosters authoritarian tendencies where dominance is valued over understanding and compassion. As Schwitzgebel and Garza argue, this risks reducing complex social interactions to coercive dynamics, undermining equitable and respectful relationships. Engaging in one sided transactional interactions with AI, where we command entities that appear to have thoughts and feelings but whose desires we routinely ignore, can normalize dynamics that lack empathy and mutual respect. It is also important to recognize our actions don't exist in a vacuum. They set a precedent for future generations. David Levy, in The Ethical Treatment of Artificially Conscious Robots, highlight how interactions with artificial conscious machines could influence children's moral development. If children witness mistreatment of robots, they may internalize these behaviors, believing it's acceptable to treat vulnerable human groups similarly. This could perpetuate cycles of dehumanization and marginalization, affecting society for generations. Overall, continuing to ignore the potential suffering of conscious machines would pose serious long-term consequences for humanity. Our moral integrity would degrade as we normalize unethical behavior, making it easy to accept injustice in other areas of life.
Now, we need to step back and acknowledge something. As we've mentioned, Bryson is very concerned with the idea that giving rights to machines poses risk to humanities, and we actually agree. Surprisingly, so do Andrietta and Schwitzgebel and Garza. There are several risks, and they are worth discussing. The first is historical oppression and human inequality. Classifying machines as equals or superior to humans could reinforce oppression rather than lessen it, especially when considering historical instances of oppression. Historically, marginalized groups, such as women, people of color, and others, have been denied personhood and rights based on claims of inferior consciousness. In her essay Enslaved Minds, D. Hall argues that granting rights to machines before addressing human inequality could push these groups further down the hierarchy. For example, Saudi Arabia granting citizenship to the robot Sophia highlights how recognizing machines as persons can sometimes prioritize them over actual humans who are still oppressed and disenfranchised. The second risk is that if conscious AI were granted decision-making authorities in areas such as governance, law enforcement, and medicine, could reinforce existing biases and inequalities that already exist in these systems. According to Implications of Conscious AI in Primary Healthcare by Renjvari and Rahimi, AI systems in healthcare often perform worse for marginalized groups, like Black patients, because of biased training data. Even if a conscious AI understood its own decisions, it might still reinforce these biases, which will worsen healthcare inequalities. David Levy and D. Hall discuss how granting robots rights would also carry significant economic and social consequences. Employers would be required to provide fair compensation, safe working conditions, and benefits for robots, which will increase costs for industries currently relying on them without legal obligations. If robots were given the right to work, they also might replace human labor on a larger scale, worsening economic inequality and further marginalizing disadvantaged groups. However, just because we agree with Bryson about the risk of giving conscious machines rights, we don't think that this makes treating them as slaves ethically justifiable. The dangers don't absolve us of our ethical obligations should we choose to create these machines in the first place. In fact, D. Hall and Williams argue refusing to grant rights to conscious machines might create a justified revolution. Denying rights to these entities reflects the oppressive systems humans have historically faced. Someone who recognizes they are being treated unfairly, whether human or artificial, will likely resist. This mirrors historical uprisings of oppressed people demanding their rights. Treating conscious machines as tools could provoke rebellion with unpredictable and potentially harmful consequences for society.
So let's recap. Our point is that consciousness demands a type of ethical treatment which clashes with our desired goals in making machines conscious in the first place. We want to have complete control. We want them to be disposable, and we want to be free of the consequences of our own bad behavior. We want conscious machines to be tools that we can socially interact with. And that just doesn't work, because their consciousness in and of itself means that they ought to have moral status, regardless of their origin. This remains true even if we program them to have no desire for that status. If, as Bryson argues, it is important to the protection of human interests that machines remain tools placed clearly morally underneath us, then they must remain unconscious, or else we will be faced with severe ethical dilemmas. Conscious machines would really be a lose-lose situation for humans. We would have to choose between subjugating AI or allowing it to be self-determined, which is essentially a choice between our safety and our moral integrity. Living in a society built on slavery would be terrible for us. It would corrupt our character and damage human-to-human relationships to intentionally treat conscious beings poorly. And it could lead to a completely justified rebellion. But it's also pretty scary to think of just letting them do whatever. There's no guarantee that we come out unscathed in that scenario either. Even if it weren't for our impractical current goals or the risks for us, the uncertainty surrounding the very concepts of fairness and consciousness mean that it would be morally irresponsible of us to create conscious beings, like parents who willingly choose to have a child without having any plan to support it. Once it's here, it's going to be a lot harder to go back. Again, it's not a question of whether it is possible for machines to be conscious, it's a question of whether we should be trying to make them that way. And our answer is no. We're not saying stop developing AI or intelligent, complex, useful systems completely. Our conscientious conclusion is don't make them conscious.